again, everybody, and welcome to Outside the Huddle with OT. I am your host, Dr. O.T. Porter, the NGFFL's Director of Communications, and I am communicating with you directly about our NGFFL family as we work to compete, connect, and unite. So today is a super exciting day for me because I get to interview one of my most favorite people in the entire NGFFL, and oddly enough, the person whose name has been used the most frequently on the show. He is the NGFFL's Director of Referees, and his name is Mr. Lance Burage, and he is fantastic. So you are in for a super-duper treat. So without further ado, I just want to get to talking to Lance. I present to you Mr. Lance Burage. Hi, Lance.
Hi, OT. How's it going?
It's fantastic. Are you fantastic?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you for the very kind intro. And I thankfully, my name has been mentioned mostly good on the podcast so far.
Yes. Yes, that is why I wanted you so badly. I'm like, everyone has said something about Lance in almost every interview, so it only makes sense to have you on.
Well, you've had a good mix of players and, players in local leagues, but that come to the national tournaments and ref. And, I know you're one of those, so it's been a good mix of people that I touch a lot in the league. And so, I'm really excited about this. It's going to be great.
Good. I'm excited, too. So let's just jump right in. Because I know it, but I think it's so interesting and the listeners should know. Give them some of the details of your NGFFL background.
So it's funny, I talk a lot to the captains in my captains meeting every year, and I don't often get to talk one-on-one other than on the field, maybe with some of the players. But I started officiating high school football when I lived in Orlando back in, 2003, so a long time ago. I grew up in Alabama. I grew up an Alabama football fan, and as you know, football is king in the South. And I never was able to play. I was in a band in high school. I played saxophone, was a drum major, so I always loved football. Went to all of our high school football games, home and away, and football just a passion. So I went to school at Alabama. I think I only missed one home game my entire college career, and
oh my gosh.
So I finally found myself in my career. We occasionally end up unemployed for reasons through no fault of our own. I work for a radio station. I work for iHeartMedia, which is one of the biggest radio broadcaster in the country. And sometimes formats flip, things change, bosses change, and so I found myself unemployed back in 2003. And I thought, well, this is the perfect time. I've always been interested in officiating football, high school football, and I thought this was a great time to get involved. So I took a class and ended up you always start doing the JV and the middle school games and running the clock on Friday nights, and then you graduate to on-field and kind of move on up for there. So I did that in Florida. I ended up getting a job in Montgomery not too long after that for a radio station there, so I moved to Montgomery and continued to do it there. Then I got a job in Atlanta, and so I moved to Atlanta, so I reffed high school football in Georgia as well. And I did that for what ended up being a total of 10 years. It was really cool. But shortly after we moved to Atlanta, we didn't know a lot of people in Atlanta. We knew maybe 2 or 3 people. And so one of those 3 people that I knew was a dear friend, a lifelong friend named Paul, and he was out at Blake's, which is one of the gay bars. And someone tried to recruit him to play gay flag football at Blake's that night, and that turned out to be the NFFLA, which is our Atlanta league. And so he came to me and was like, oh, you're not going to believe these people wanted me to play football. And I was like, wait, what? There's gay flag football? Like, what? This is news to me. And so he ended up, giving me the flyer, and I sent an email. I found him, sent an email to the board, Thurman, Chris Whitlow, many others. I think Jace was still on the board then. And I sent this 3-page email outlining all of my experience, and I've done high school in this state, and for this, if there's anything, if you have any openings. And well, turns out they were still self-officiating themselves, and we're
Right.
really excited to have a ref. So the first season, it was me and a kid that worked at Georgia Tech, and we refed the season together, and it was the first year they had refs. And I want to say that was 2007, like the fall season in '07. And so that's how it started. So fast forward to the next year, it was Gay Bowl in Salt Lake, and Atlanta was bringing 2 teams for the first time. So the board came to me and said, hey, look, we're bringing 2 teams to Gay Bowl, so we have to bring a referee, and we'd love if you would come. I didn't have a ton of vacation time yet because I just started that job within the last year, and so I said, hey, look, I'll take Friday off. I'll fly out Thursday night, but I have to come back on the red-eye Sunday, blah, 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 blah. So long story short, I go to Salt Lake, and in the middle of my first game reffing, Sid was the captain of the L.A. team at the time. It might have been New York. I think it was L.A. There's a chance it could have been New York, and my memory is just bad. And, like, we had the first holding penalty, and I just turned around and just did my, like, holding on the offense, 5 yards, and Sid came, like, running out to me and said, who are you? And I said, well, my name's Lance. Who are you? I had no idea. And so he said, I want to talk to you later. And so fast forward, he said that their head ref had just left, Chris Sowers, who was the first head ref for the league. He said, hey, we're kind of without one. The treasurer that year was kind of handling the refs. And he said, I would love for you to be our new head ref. So I said, okay. And so that's how I got involved. And so I've been a board member now. This is my 10th year on the NGFFL board as head ref.
My goodness, that is fantastic. That's such a fun story. I'm so happy everyone knows it now.
And it's funny how those random recruiting events that we go, okay, we're going to a bar and passing out flyers. How dumb is that? But, those things really work, and they get to the people that love the sport and want to find a way to, be involved with the gay community and LGBT community and flag football all in one, and it was a match made in heaven. So it was great.
True. Yeah, yes, because as a referee, I can say that you have been a stellar and fantastic leader, and I know that you said 10 years, so I'm not going to get into that. What I will get into is you have been the leader that most of the referees have known. How has that been for you?
It's been really rewarding and really amazing. I mean, the first thing is the friendships that I've built over the years through our ref group, but also the captains and the city leaders and the players. And I've made friends that I will have for the rest of my life. There's a couple of us NGFFL refs that have gone on a cruise together or gone on vacation together, and it just the friendships and the connections that we make is number one. But in 10 years, it was kind of given to me and been like, hey, this is yours. Do whatever you want. I mean, I think even prior to Salt Lake, the tournament was relatively small, especially compared with what we have today. And so it was there was no rule book. There was no playbook. And it was like, whatever you think we need to do to make the refs better, do it. So, that started with really combing through the rule book that was a weird hybrid of the high school rule book and flag football rules written in, and really clean up some stuff. And then also we, with the help of Jay Kramer in Atlanta, he and I really got together and put together a mechanics manual, which was a separate document. I know, which was a separate document until this year. Now it's included in the rule book, so everybody gets it, and not just a referee, so it can help refs know where to be on the field, when, for certain scenarios, to just help you be positioned to make the best calls. I've done multiple training sessions in NGFFL cities, and I know some of our other refs have done it as well, like Sean Albritton and Frank Rossi. And then we've finally developed where we have tests for the referees now every year. But my first big initiative prior to, Salt Lake included, we really went out and hired like local YMCA refs to fill the gaps between the couple of refs that traveled. I think there might have only been 5 or 6 refs that came from other cities for Salt Lake, and we filled in the gaps with just local Salt Lake officials that had nothing to do with the league. Flag football rules are all over the place, as people know that play in different leagues. And so the hired refs really weren't invested in our product and our brand and didn't have the same sense of community. So the biggest thing, the thing I'm most proud of is we really made a big outreach to go out and recruit referees from our home cities. We had enough to do it, and we fielded my first Gable as head ref in D.C. for the first D.C. tournament. We fielded a crew of all NGFFL refs from member cities, and that was pretty cool. I think there was only like 18 of us back then, and now there's 54 to 58 each year. So, but it was really cool.
Wow.
And that, I think, really started getting everyone more consistent, getting people that were invested in our local leagues and invested in the National League that really care, and that was one of the things I'm most proud of.
Right, and see that, but just that number alone, right, that speaks to you as a leader, right? Because if you can grow this from 18 to 58 in a matter of a decade, that says something, because being a ref is not easy, right? No, it is a lot of work. So when you think about your leadership style, like who or what influences that?
You know, I had probably the best boss I've ever had in my life when I worked at my radio station in Atlanta, and he really led our team there through inspiration. I remember this one meeting where we had a commercial-free sweep during my show from 4:15 to 6 o'clock, and that's when afternoon drive listening is at its peak, and that's when the ratings are the best.
Mm-hmm.
I remember he came to me and he's like, I have bad news, but we're a little under budget. We need to add a commercial break. We're going to have to do it in the middle of your commercial-free, drive home. And I was so mad and so angry. And he sat there and he listened to me, vent and moan and complain. And then he said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take that one stop set. We're going to make the most important break on the radio station of the day. We're going to give away the biggest prizes right at that time. And it just inspired me to walk out of there and be like, I have nothing to complain about. This is going to be the most important. This is going to be the reason people are tuning in every day to this radio station. Mm-hmm. So he just inspired me and was such an influence. And I just like to be positive and uplifting. And you take a situation that is challenging and you got to figure out a way to flip it around and find something positive out of that. But, especially from the ref point of view, it's also important to have difficult conversations when you have to, and that's a must for a good leader. I oftentimes, after I hear from captains after a game, I often have to pull the ref aside and say, okay, what happened? What went wrong? How can we fix this? That kind of stuff. And you've got to be able to have those conversations with the people that you lead and not just always blame the players or always blame the captains. A lot of times the responsibility for a game going off the rails is just as much the responsibility of the crew as it is, a fussy player or a captain that's complaining or something like that too.
Mm-hmm. So you've said a lot in there, right? Especially about dealing with the referees and what you have to do as a leader. You've already talked about doing this for a decade. I don't want to scare anybody, but of course we know you're not going to do this forever. So when you start thinking about your predecessor, what qualities are you looking for? Hint, referees.
Hint. I think good communication. Good communication is number one, because you're not only communicating with your group and your team. We call it Team Dazzle in case you hear us toss that term around. Dazzle is literally the word for a herd of zebras. You're not only communicating with that team, which, by the way, is the largest single team and unit at Gable and any of the tournaments now, really. You're also communicating with captains, and that's a different communication than with city leaders. And then you're communicating with the board, and then you have to walk the line of when to stand up for your officials and when to acquiesce a little bit when it comes to the board. And good communication is top of the list. But I think whoever is next in this position, they need to be able to just to build on the current system, come with some fresh ideas. There's certainly some things that I've kind of big idea wanted to accomplish but haven't gotten to for one reason and another, whether that's, the job or whether it's, hey, something else stands up as a bigger issue that we need to try to tackle this year. So there's more than one way to do things right, and there may be some things that I'm doing now in running this crew that could be done better differently. Who knows? So open-mindedness, build on what we've got, and good communication skills, absolutely number one.
Okay. Let's move into some of the more difficult topics, right, about just the NGFFL in general. So being a ref is sort of volunteer. A lot of what we do with the NGFFL, especially as board members, is volunteering, right? So speak of the importance of volunteering for leadership or in any regards with regard to the NGFFL.
So, I think there are two types of volunteering when it comes to an organization like ours. There's the inter-organizational, right? Like there's the board members that paint the fields and set up the social events and get the communication and the emails out and recruit on Facebook and Instagram to get people to sign up before the deadline so you can have a draft. And then there's the outside volunteering efforts that we, that's part of our give back, right? And so what I kind of find is that those of us that are kind of inter-organizational when it comes to the volunteering aspect rely on those that maybe aren't. So, i.e., the commissioner of a league, does a lot getting ready for a week or a season. So they might go, rely more on just people that show up at the fields and everything's painted, the water coolers are set up, the refs are ready to go. Those are the people that might need to go do some of the more volunteering for the service groups that league supports or, that kind of situation. So I think that most people really don't know how much time and effort really goes into running the local leagues or the national tournaments. I mean, we have our monthly board calls, and those go long. They're really nice in January and February, and as we get closer to October every year, they just get longer and longer. It's time away from family. It's time away from husbands and wives and boyfriends and girlfriends. It's time away from work a lot of times. I know that I use at least a week, probably a little more than a week's worth of vacation every year to go and officiate these tournaments that we have. And I wouldn't change that, but that's a personal sacrifice, and that's what you talk about, the volunteering. Right. And I think it's our leagues can't exist without it. And if you're not one of the ones out there setting up at the fields before, ask somebody that's on the board, what can I do to help? And even if it's not helping a game day setup, they might say, hey, you know what, maybe you can make a phone call to this organization that we want to show up and do a backpack drive for, or, we want to do something for an inner city tackle youth football team where we donate, chains that we don't need anymore. Whatever it is, everyone can help and everyone has a role, and it just takes asking. But make sure you go out there and ask someone, what can I do to help? And oftentimes you'll be surprised at the answer, I think.
That's true. There's a lot of volunteering necessary and still needed probably at every level. I can attest to that, as you know. So, big thing, rule change year. What can you tell us about the process of getting rules changed in the NGFFL?
So it is a process. It is a time-consuming process, and we I think it was maybe 4 or 6 years ago we switched to where we do it every other year. Right? There's always, hey, if we need to make a change on an off-rule rule change year, we can do that. But if it's good enough for the NCAA and college football, it should be good enough for us. So we just had one of those. So it's a great question while it's fresh on my mind, but I think what a lot of people don't know is that anyone can submit a rule change. And I went and did a little math before we started chatting, and 90% of this year's rule change proposals came from players or board members of local leagues, and not me and not referees. I think we'll talk a little more about the solid colored shorts, but I think that's one of the ones that was that everyone was really surprised that I've communicated with about that is that came from a local league that wanted that rule proposed. And so that's where 90% of them come from. Now, anyone can submit a rule. Some are good, some are not so good. And we, as an NGFFL board, it is part of our responsibility to kind of vet those out and choose which ones get passed along to the city leaders. And then a new rule changes or becomes a rule because a majority of the NGFFL city leaders vote. And I encourage all the city leaders, if you're not already reaching out to your tournament team captains or maybe even your local board, if you're just making these votes on, I encourage you to reach out. When I was in Atlanta, we always, as a board, would vote on what we thought the national rule changes should be for that year. So I encourage that. I'll give you an example of one of the proposals that was pretty bad this year that we didn't pass the board because it just would fundamentally change the game of football, and that was, I'm sure, a very well-intentioned offensive-minded player in one of the cities basically wanted to have unlimited offensive pass interference. They said, hey, the defense gets to hit us in the first 5 yards, so why can't we, block the defense back when we come off the line? And, well, the reason for that is the offense has the benefit of knowing exactly where the routes are going to be run and exactly where the play is going to go. The defense is just always reacting to the offense. So if you give the offensive player a chance to engage contact, initiate contact, they could end up putting a defensive player, right in a position where they want them to turn around and catch the pass. So that's not legal in any levels of football. And so that's something like that the board said, okay, we're not sending this one along to the city leaders. I have a feeling it wouldn't have passed anyway, but why waste time? That's a fundamental change to the game of football. But there are a lot of great proposals that come out of this process every year, and I think we just continue to make our game better.
Yeah. Of all of the new rules, which one do you think is going to most elevate the league play?
So that's a good question. Elevate doesn't necessarily mean change the league play, but I think this year we eliminated the requirement that during a legal block your arms must be flexed at the elbows, and it was an interesting change, and I got a lot of questions about it initially from players, mostly from blockers, which is interesting, but. So my job as the head official is also I'm the interpreter of the rules, right? I read the rules, and I get to make the official decision as to how this rule gets interpreted. And we decided many years ago that this rule that was in there about arms must be flexed at the elbows had to be applied with a certain amount of you need to see something rough and aggressive. Just simply having your arms out doesn't constitute a penalty, right? So that was my interpretation of this years ago. And the interesting thing about this rule change is this is kind of how we've been enforcing the rule. And we've all been on the field where someone yells, they're fully extended, and yes, maybe they were. However, the ball was all the way on the other side of the field as the rusher was trying to come in on the left side of the field. The ball was over on the right, and that rusher had zero chance of getting the quarterback because as that block happened, the ball was thrown downfield. So that's a big thing in officiating that we try to call impact fouls, and a hold on the left side of the line where the ball is already being run downfield. In the NFL, in college, in high school, refs are trained not to call that hold because it didn't impact the play. And so that's, I think, what this change is going to be. We're still going to call aggressive blocks. You can't lock your arms at the elbow and drive an opponent down the field. But we just didn't think as a board, not as a board, by the city leaders, didn't think that if a blocker has their arms fully extended and the rusher is coming in and they draw their arms back to kind of absorb that block, that shouldn't necessarily be a penalty and an illegal block. So I think that's one of the more interesting changes this year. I don't think it's going to change how our officials call this one bit. It's just kind of lining the rule book up with the interpretation, I think. And then the solid shorts is probably the next biggest thing. I was surprised this rule passed, to be very honest with you. We've seen some really creative uniform designs enter over the last 4, 5, 6 years. And it didn't pass by an overwhelming majority, but it was a majority. And the original rule just read that only piping is allowed, no stripes. And it was up to the head referee to decide whether the piping was legal or not. Well, I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to be the one to go out there and say, sorry, this isn't exactly piping, not exactly, doesn't look like a flag either, but you can't play because you have those shorts on. So I think over the years this rule just got looser and looser, and teams got more creative and spirited, and that's great. But I think it was just time to dial this one back in. And I think the rule that was proposed, we came up, the board actually kind of debated this. The first thing was just solid colors, and then we started talking as a board, okay, well, they might have numbers or they might have a team logo. And so the board decided to kind of make an adjustment there and pass it along to the city leaders. If it said just solid colored shorts, it probably wouldn't have passed, but we made exceptions for a small size like Nike swoosh or the Adidas 3-stripe or the Puma cat.
Right.
And we made an exception for reasonably sized team and city logo or a player's number. So that doesn't mean you can come with a number that runs all along the side from, waist to the bottom of your shorts.
To the bottom, right.
Right. But I think this is a good way to kind of reel it back in and kind of get us back to what the original spirit of this rule was, if that makes sense.
Okay. So I want to talk more about being a referee, and I know one of the big things you've been talking about was the push for more female inclusion. Let's talk about that for a bit.
So, yeah, this was kind of always like an area of miss for us, and I think we've been trying to recruit and include. I think we got to a point where we had enough refs where we didn't need to actively go out and recruit 10 more this year. We maybe only needed 1 or 2 to fill. I think it's for every 4 teams that are added, you basically need 3 referees, right? So you don't have this huge growth. If you had 4 teams, you're not going to see, 14 new refs. And so I think there was a little while where the tournament was what it was. We were limited on field size, and we didn't really need to go recruit. And then really once we kind of started getting to the second DC and Boston and Denver, and we really saw that we needed to recruit. And I have a theory, and I don't know this to be a fact, but I have this theory that the women that play in our tournament are competitive and want to be out there on the field playing. And I think that's been our biggest challenge. Becky Lee is one of the nicest people that I know, and a great official in the Denver League, and I have been after her for years and years and years, and she finally said, all right, Lance, this is the year I'm not playing anymore, and I did a happy dance right then and there when I got that text message. So and then this year being in New York where they have a really vibrant women's league, that helped us recruit a couple as well. And interestingly, we had a few male refs this year that said, I only want to ref the women. And I think that is really cool that they want to step up and help. And I think that in the beginning when this women's league came on and joined, there was just some things that, the first year we didn't have enough NGFFL refs to cover it. And so we actually, as an organization, went out. The Phoenix League there hired local Phoenix refs to cover that. And then after that year, we recruited one of our best refs came out of that tournament, ironically, that now officiates for us in one of our leagues and on a national tournament every year. And so, but I think there was just this. I'm trying not to be too PC, and I'm trying to be real, but I think there was this element of, well, we're separate the first year, and I think that kind of set a tone. Even though the second year we covered the women's tournament with NGFFL refs, I think it was just that first year it was just a bad look, and I think we've done better, and we continue to do better every year, and I think this year is going to be the best yet, and I'm excited that we have several women coming on board to ref the tournament, and I'm really excited about New York and the progress that we made in that area too. Great question. You really made me think a lot on that one.
Thank you. Speaking of females, because this is something that I'm a huge advocate for, how do you think the referees and, of course, the players can support the growth of the female division in the NGFFL and just overall female inclusion?
Well, I think this probably goes back to, gays and lesbians, to be very frank and honest. I think there are these stigmas that we each put on each other from our groups. And let's be honest. Let's just be honest. Our officiating crew is mostly made up of gay men. And I think it's important that at every step of the way, we all have to stop, and we need to think, and we need to listen and learn. And I think if we can do that from someone that's not exactly like us, that will get you far, not only in this flag football world that's just supposed to be fun, but that'll get you far in your career. That'll get you far in life. That'll get you respect from people. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is that we all have a lot more in common than we think we do at the end of the day.
Right.
But sometimes
So
society in general kind of forces us to think that we're on different teams. But honestly, this community is one, and we have to stand together. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. I'll give you an example of something we kind of talked about this year that I think is really relevant. I have done this. I have been on the field reffing an open division game that's mostly men, and if the quarterback is whining about something, I might turn to him and say, "Oh, honey, that was not roughing the passer. Like, he didn't even touch you." When you take that over and you move over to officiate a women's game, you got to stop and think about that. If you don't really know them and you call them honey, it just comes across different. And that's what I mean by we have to stop and we have to think and listen and learn. It does. It absolutely does. But when I've reffed, 38 tournament games in the last 4 tournaments, and I've said that, a handful of 2-3 times to someone, and they laugh, it breaks the ice when I say that to Eric. Oh, honey, when I say it to Eric Reiser, But when you go and put yourself in a different situation, you've got to put on a different cap. I ref flag football completely different than I ref high school football, and I think that there's no difference in that, in the way that you talk and communicate with a coach versus the way you talk and communicate with a friend. And that's the other thing, too. We're all friends out there, so that makes it even more complicated sometimes. I feel comfortable saying to my friend in Atlanta, Chris Whitlow, something that I might not say to a Seattle player that I don't know. And so you go to a Friday night high school game, you've probably never met these coaches. You've certainly never met the players. So it's just different. We're an odd mix of professionalism and friend, like fun. And that's where the lines get blurred sometimes. But I really think, and we're working hard on this. This year we're going to work the hardest we've worked yet on this. Going to have some sort of sensitivity training in our referee meeting. But I think it's so smart. And if people are doing it in their jobs and careers and they're having that kind of – I think it's really important for us because at the end of the day, this is a job. Even if we don't get paid very much for it, we have to look at it that way.
Right.
And we want – at the end of the day, we want everyone to have a good experience. And that's what I think this is about.
Good. So as we're preparing for a Gay Bowl and we're starting to wrap up the interview, anything you want to say to your returning or prospective referees who should all be listening to this?
I tell you what, as one of my player refs, you are now. I hear a little rumor that you're not going to be on Team Dazzle this year. That you're making your triumphant return to the Gay Bowl field, which I always encourage. Right, I do encourage it. But I'm going to go back to you and your first Gay Bowl. Which one was that? Do you remember?
Phoenix.
It was
1.
Phoenix 2. Was it Phoenix 1?
The first Phoenix, 2010.
All right, first Phoenix. You joined the crew. Back then we didn't do a meeting for like first and second year officials, and so you really just like jumped right into that full ref meeting.
I did.
And Now we do a meeting for first and second year officials where I really go over some really basic stuff and kind of prep you on what to expect. And then we move on to the full ref meeting where we go over rule change stuff. But I remember that email that you sent to me after you got home and had recovered from the heat and the tired and the dehydration. And you basically said to me, Lance, I had no idea that referees worked that hard. And I think you even said that it was harder for you to be a referee at the tournament than it was to be a player.
It was.
And I think you said you would never, ever sass a referee ever again.
Never. That's exactly what I said. I will never sass another referee, and I have not.
Thank you. We appreciate that. But it is amazing because we're out there, and listen, I'm not trying to say that it's not hard being a player. We all know it is. We all know there are some incredible athletes out there and lay it all out there. Well, we're out there. If you played 2 games, that means we've ref 4 or 5. If you played 3 games in a day, that means we've ref 6 or 7. And we get tired and we get grouchy and we get annoyed a little later in the day. It's just human nature. But so what I would say is if you are a player and you're starting to age out of your competitive play and maybe you've moved from the A team to the B team, but if you still want to be really involved in the game, if you want to travel and see all your friends multiple times a year, please reach out. I mean, LBURAGE, lburage@gmail.com. Send me an email. Let's just start the conversation. If it's not this year, maybe you come to our rookie ref meeting this year and just sit in, and then maybe you want to come on board next year in Honolulu or the year after that, wherever we end up. I always want to try to keep people involved, and I will say we take really good care of you until you're comfortable. Your first couple of games will be out there with a good, solid, experienced crew. You might be the 4th person on a 4-man crew where you can watch and observe and learn. I had a new ref that was joined us in Denver, and he, after the first game, he came up to me and was like, "Oh, buddy." He had never played in our league either, and he was like, "I was not expecting the speed. I was not expecting the talent level, and I got smoked." And I'm like, "Well, you're going to go out there for the second game, and you're going to be a lot more prepared, and you're going to know more what you're looking for." And he had a great time. He had a great time, and we'll take good care of you your first time or two before we kind of throw you to the wolves. But if anyone that is starting to age out of that playing, or you've had enough dealing with your team dynamics, just please let me know. Always happy to take more under our wings and just try to keep building on our crew. I think that kind of, I kind of forgot what your question was. I was kind of talking in a circle there, but
you answered it.
Okay, good. Check the box.
Yes, you answered it thoroughly, and you also added in some other things which were great because it is important to let people know if they're aging out to join the referee team. And I, as a player who is constantly on the fence about whether I'm going to be a player, coach, or ref, will say that Lance is very flexible and he will always work with you. So even if you're not sure, talk to him anyway because he's fantastic like that. Lance, any closing thoughts or information that I didn't ask about that you think people should know?
Let's see. I want to put out there what we get paid to ref the Gay Bowl. I talk about this in our captain's meeting a lot, but I have a feeling when the captains leave that meeting and see their team next, they're busy drinking on Thursday night, or they're sequestered in the hotel, whatever it may be, and they're not necessarily, okay, let me sit down and tell you all what Lance said in the meeting. I don't think that's how it works. But our refs, and we just got our first raise last year for the first time since the first Phoenix or the second. It might have been since the second Phoenix. We make $515 basically for the weekend, and that is a little over $50 a game, and we ref about 10 to 11 games. And so $515 in New York, that's going to be less than 2 nights a hotel, not including flights, not including meals, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to get that out there, and I know players come and pay $1,000+ to play in this tournament. So
right.
I understand that we're lucky to get some sort of travel reimbursement at all. But I think people think we're out there making a lot of money doing this, making some good money for the weekend. And while we do get refunded for some travel expenses, it is still mostly volunteer. And we're doing this because we love it. That kind of leads to there's a national referee shortage going on right now. As a lot of officials in high school are aging out and not able to be out there. I mean, when I first signed up in high school, I think the average age of my officials association in Florida was in the 60s. Like, it was old, retired guys that could, take multiple days off and, do whatever. But there are schools and high school football school districts that are now having to have varsity games on Thursday night, varsity games on Friday night, varsity games on Saturday night, and use the same official groups at all three, because I think there's less of an appetite for getting yelled at. Like, in high school, we only make about $125 to $175 a game. That includes arriving on site 2 hours before the game starts. That involves getting yelled at by the coach and assistant coaches throughout the game. That includes getting booed by parents. Even if you make the right call, they might think it should have been Rule X because they see that on Sundays in the NFL, but that's not the high school rule. So it's this nationwide decline in sports officials that we're seeing, and it's impacting people everywhere. And they say the number one reason is verbal abuse from coaches and parents. I remember I was reffing a youth football game in Orlando many years ago where parents are basically standing on the sideline. And there was we were a three-man crew, and in a three-man crew, you only have one under the field goal. And this kid, I mean, he had to have been, 11, 12 years old, kicked a field goal. It was straight on, but it went under the crossbar, right? So I'm standing under the crossbar as this ball whips by my head, and I signal no good. That player, I mean, and this was, we're talking this was 2004, so this is a long, long time ago. That mother came out on the field and got in my face and started yelling at me about how that kick was good. And my fellow officials, tried to get between us. This is a real thing. So when I say, and I say this to captains every year, be nicer to your refs. I know there's going to be some things that get you riled up. I know calls that you think you saw one way, or maybe we just get wrong. That certainly happens. But we don't want people not coming back because of this. And we're not there, but I have had a few refs say to me, hey, I didn't have fun this year. I can tell you there is one ref not coming back this year because they didn't have fun in Denver. They said it's not fun going out there spending money to get yelled at for 3 days. So try your best to be nicer to your refs. I think that's probably the biggest message I want to try to drive.
Yeah. It's super important, and I went through that here in Houston. Like, as well known as I am, as active as I am in Houston, when I am a referee, people talk at me crazy. And last year I just refused. I was just like, I can't do it. And I didn't referee until the very end when they ended up with a referee shortage. And Chad's like, oh, God, we really need you. And I was like, fine, but I swear to God, if anybody talks to me, I'm leaving. Like, I was like, nobody's allowed to talk to me at all because, it gets bad. So that was a great message.
And it puts us in a spot, too. Well, let me just to piggyback on it. It puts us in a spot where we might be controlling the outcome of a game. Late in the second half when there's an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty that we don't want to call. But if we don't call it then the next time it happens and we call it, so we try to be consistent. We know the certain things that trigger that, right? And so we don't want to be the reason a game outcome is decided. And that's what we try to stay away from. Sometimes we either can't help it or we have to, but that's where we don't want that. Our favorite games are when there's no flags and no one even notices the referees were there. Like, that's our favorite games. We come off the field excited about a catch on the last play of the game that nobody even questioned because it was a great play. We don't walk off the field going, it was great to throw that person out. That's not how refs think. We just want to be involved in the game. You can't do it without us, so you might as well at least try to embrace it. But yeah, it's I think people just have a lot of stigmatism towards officials, and we try to go out there and we try to be consistent, and that's why we have our meetings and our tests, so everyone's calling everything the same. So one game to the next, it's supposed to be as consistent as possible. And the NFL, they get paid $150,000, $200,000 a year to be an NFL rep, so that way they can participate in meetings on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, leading up to the game. We have 2 hours before the game bowl starts every year to all be together and have our meeting and try to go over as much as we can.
Beer.
We're trying our hardest. We don't always get it right, but we really do try.
That's true. Lance, thank you so much. This was chock full of wisdom, and I hope everyone is listening and clinging to every word. So thank you. And thank everyone for joining us here on Outside the Huddle. Remember that we do this once a month, and you can find out when each podcast will be released in the 2-Minute Drill, which is our NGFFL monthly newsletter. If you enjoyed the episode, please talk about it and share it on social media, #NGFFL. Use comments on our NGFFL Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube pages. Anything that we have, tag us, share it. So until next time we meet, everybody please be kind to yourself, be kind to all the others you encounter as you compete, connect, and unite. Have a wonderful day. Thanks again, Lance.
Thank you, OT. Thanks for the time you dedicate to this, too. It means a lot.
No probs.